Section 9 of Music by Ursula Creighton. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 9, Harpsichord Composers. Alessandro Scarlatti's son, Domenico Scarlatti, 1685 to 1757, was also a famous composer, but of different music. He was the first composer to write with freedom for the harpsichord, a stringed instrument which may be called the precursor of the pianoforte. But the strings of the harpsichord were plucked by a quill instead of being hit by a hammer, and it made quite a different sound, the higher notes sounding like a harp, but the lower ones more jingling. Nor could the tone be varied at all except by pedals. The notes were equally loud however you played them. You just put each key down, and it played its jingling sound, quite unlike the modern piano, where all depends on how you put the key down. For on the modern piano you can play each note soft or loud, singing or muffled, or indeed in many different ways. But all this was not possible on the harpsichord. There was yet another keyboard instrument in use at this time, called the clavichord. It was so soft it could only be heard across a room, but you could play with expression on it, since it was possible to alter the tone a little from soft to loud according to your pressure on the keys, for the clavichord had a different kind of action from that of the harpsichord. When one of its keys was depressed, a brass upright, called a tangent, pushed up against the string to make it sound. These three ways of making the string vibrate make, of course, very different sounds. The plucked strings of the harpsichord sound jingling. The push strings of the clavichord very quiet but sweet, while the struck strings of the piano have an infinite variety of sounds according to the skill of the player who makes the hammer hit the string suddenly or slowly, hardly or softly, or in the many ways that a skillful player uses instinctively as he produces his varied notes, ways which it would be impossible to describe. Footnote: it is sometimes a little confusing to understand the many names that are given to old instruments of this kind. These various names usually apply to the quill-plucked instrument, which was made in different shapes and had different names according to its shape. When its form was that of our grand piano, called trapeze shape, the instrument was called a harpsichord, but also clavicembalo, clavecin, flugel, or spinet. There was also a kind of harpsichord upright in shape, something like our upright piano, and it was called a clavicithrum. There was a similar instrument of oblong shape, like a table. This was always called a spinet. End footnote. Domenico Scarlatti composed large numbers of pieces for the harpsichord, and we now hear them played on the piano. Many of the effects of modern piano music were originated by him. He wrote for crossed hands and passages of quick light notes, and notes so quick and far apart that the hand has to fly to them. In fact, his pieces required what we should call a real technique of piano playing, those special ways of playing notes that are effective on the instrument and need special practice. His music is still difficult to play, but it is always a pleasure to hear. It is so delicate and clear. One other composer was famous for the music he wrote for the harpsichord, and also for his harpsichord playing, the French organist François Couperin, who was born 15 years before Domenico Scarlatti. When Couperin lived, music for the harpsichord depended for its interest on being tuneful, rhythmic like a dance, and having ornaments. These ornaments are groups of short notes which are played quickly just before the note they ornament. As the tone of the harpsichord did not last after the note was struck, any long note was usually alternated with a note next above or below it so as to continue the sound. This made a group of quick notes in place of one long one. Such groups of notes made beautiful effects. Couperin's music is full of them. He wrote little dance tunes such as Lully would have written for ballet, and his plan was to combine several short dances together by playing them one after the other. The separate pieces following each other made thus one long piece of music called a suite. It was thus that the first long pieces of music for harpsichord came into existence. Couperin gave names to all his little dances, and the music still sounds dainty and pleasing when played on the piano. That composers should write numbers of dance tunes and find an interest in arranging them to contrast well with each other in suites is not surprising when we consider how much dancing was practiced at that time. Now, when a great interest is taken in folk dancing, we see a good deal of such dancing and realize the number of dances that have been collected. Quite unlike our modern ballroom dancing, where a few dances are all that are used, anyone who dances folk dances has numbers of different dances in which he can join. In the days of early writers of suites, Couperin, Scarlatti, Purcell, and others, people danced numbers of dances. Traveling musicians and soldiers home from foreign wars brought with them some knowledge of the dances of other countries. And though the poorer people might only dance the folk dances peculiar to their own country, the cultivated classes learned dances of every country. And at court balls, all sorts of dances from different nations were popular. Some were courtly, stately dances, some more lively, and to write music for such different movements must have been fascinating. No one now dances a pavane, but the stately measured steps with the lovely dress of the time must have made that dance a beautiful picture. And that stateliness and vision is embodied in some of the short pieces written as pavanes. Very few people still dance a jig, but everyone has some idea that it is a light, gay, quick, jumping dance, and the short movements in suites, called jig, are quick and rhythmic and convey this light, elastic spirit of movement. So, in playing the old suites, which in France were called ordres and in Germany partitas, it is interesting not only to hear the beauty of the music, but to gather something of the movements the composers must have had in mind as they wrote. Many of the dances to which they wrote have quite dropped out of use, and about some of them nothing is known. Some, like the jig and minuet, are still well known, and each has a special character and rhythm which lends its charm to the music. End of section 9 of Music by Ursula Creighton, read by Martha Weller, Champaign, Illinois, February 24th, 2024.